Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to it says here the 163rd meeting of the Board of Directors of Oxleas NHS Foundation Trust. Any apologies for absence? No, no, no apologies. Thanks very much. Minutes of the last meeting. If you can sing out, please. Page 1, page 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Any matters from the minutes? If not, on the matters arising, we have 2 items, and first one of which will be provided to May 24, and then the next one to the March 24. Any issues arising from those at all? If not, we'll go straight on into our presentation, please. Neil, thank you.
The presentation today is regarding carers. Yep. Regarding carers. So you'll see in the pack that we spent quite a lot of time defining what we mean by carers, because we have a wide range of people who are in the service user's life, some of whom are described as carers. And the presentation today is focusing on them because they're very specific needs, which we've tried to define. It's been a long-term project, not just for Oxleas, but for all trusts, to involve people who are in the service user's life. Many of us, including me, in the 80s, trained nothing in our training about working with people in the background of people's lives. We had our focus on the patient. That was our focus. And probably it's worth saying the last 15 to 20 years has been trying to turn that sort of presumption around so that we work in partnership with carers. Our carer population, you'll see from the stats, it's a very, very difficult task. And I'm sure some of us here have been carers as well. You'll see that it affects people's financial, their health, all sorts of impacts on them. Presentation today, though, is to say that we're taking a new approach because we've recently reinstalled a carers lead, one person to lead this huge agenda. What are they going to do? It's not possible for one person to kind of sort out all that need, but the approach that we've taken is to not take the focus that we used to have, which was on registering carers and then trying to get them support, because people do need support, they need respites, they need carers groups. But the bit that was missing that I think we've started to experiment with is to now involve them in co-production. So carers have told us that they do want support, but they also want to have a voice within the organization to try and help us to keep considering their needs in relation to the patients. So I have a film today where we've interviewed one of the carers who's joined our involvement register. It's interesting just to hear how she talks about these two sides, support and involvement. And the involvement bit is new. And I've given you some figures there about how many carers are on the involvement register, some of the activity they're involved with. And I'd be happy to take questions. So I'll just do the film now. So just to conclude that in an interesting way, some of what Lorraine has been able to tell us, we already know, which is that there are barriers around confidentiality or the interpretation of confidentiality, the way that our staff can become occasionally very nervous about talking to people because they worry about breaking this. These are constant problems that I think everyone, everywhere is trying to sort of overcome. Of interest to me is that even though carers are by their nature quite exhausted, they really want to do the effort to be involved. We have 5 in our shadow committee, the one that's working with us around our risk register. We have 5, and they're already telling us that we are being very unspecific about the needs of carers in relation to the risks. That actually it's very focused on service users, and we're sort of blending them as if they're the same needs. But this issue of being involved, communication, to kind of make care work in a triangle of care as a partnership. This is something that they're helping us to understand. And so I think it's a very interesting development. So I'll just pause there and see if there are any questions or thoughts.
Yeah, thanks very much, Neil. I think it was that's a really good presentation. The film it summed up the issues succinctly, didn't it? And Lorraine captured so many issues there, which I think not only sort of full-time carers, but people who've just got responsibility for people in hospital would recognise, wouldn't they? Just not being in the loop, not getting the information that you want. That was really, really quite impactful. Yes, any questions, please, Ezra?
Thanks, Neil. That was really, it was really interesting to just hear that carer perspective. I was just wondering, because we did have Oxcare brought in, which would have helped with some of those communication needs and some of the issues that we've raised. It's how well do we kind of have that known within that carer group? And what is their feedback, if any, on their experience of Oxcare and how that has helped perhaps help with some of the communication needs?
We're still at the very start of that journey with Oxcare. I think we have had some conversations, and you probably know better than me, Neil, with carers about the use of Oxcare, how it's working currently, and how that could be developed. But there are probably some quick wins there as well. But I think there was a particular session at the end of last year with carers.
There was, but what I would say is that my learning has been that the carers, even carers groups, have not been communicating with each other. So the work that Janice has been doing is, a lot of these groups are run by third sector. They're not our carers groups, but there hasn't been a collective voice going on. So I think the more we improve that, the more we can answer that really important question of getting Oxcare to work, because it really would help. Because hopefully Oxcare is not going to get scared about confidentiality, but it's a constant issue, and yeah. So getting that voice organized, that's been a surprise to me how disorganized it was in the past. It was fragmented, it wasn't disorganized.
Thanks, Neil. I was really pleased to see in your paper that there was reference to social nights out for carers that's being supported by the involvement team. And it's just a practical question, really. For these carers to go out and enjoy a social night, they're going to need some practical support to be able to leave the house. And are we working in partnership with any other agencies like Crossroads or Age UK or others to try and facilitate this so that they can have that respite out for the evening? Or is there something that we could do? I'm thinking we've got a lot of staff here who are carers, who have experience of being carers maybe, who would love to give back. Volunteering's really great, but it would have to be done through a governance framework. And I just wondered if there's something more as an anchor institution we could do to support this.
Well, you used the word at the end with anchor institutions. So we have our involved advisory group. That's where we bring all of this together. And actually we're bringing it together for the first time in many instances. So the third sector organizations and also asking for more help, because it's absolutely true. And I hope colleagues noticed that the work is also for staff carers as well, which actually is a huge contingent that we have. And you're right, it's very hard to get any respite for people, but being organized, we think, is our best shot for that.
Abby, please. Oh, sorry, Nina, if it was just next, then Abby, please.
It was a really useful presentation. Thank you, Neil. My question might come across as if I'm wanting us to run before we can walk on this, because I realise there's a lot of work that lies ahead. But are we looking to differentiate carers of different patient groups? Because when I think about what I do for my parents who are elderly, it's quite different to what I do for my kids, and I'm one person. Are we looking to design our interactions in a way that takes into account specific carer profiles?
100%. So I mentioned in the paper that we have a carers and support network strategy. It's already a ridiculously long title. And what we've learned, that was co-produced 2016. But actually in each of our directorates, so in prisons, older people, children and young people, people call themselves parents. They don't call themselves care. There are such differences so I think as we're maturing, we want that approach to reflect that. There will be a common approach in the middle, but there are also crucial differences. And that's our work for this year.
Thanks very much, Neil. I think my question is just a follow on for that, because I think the only
part that I felt was missing a bit in the paper is young carers
Yeah,
and how we're able to identify them and what support that we can provide for them, because young carers won't be able to attend the carers, or they may not be able to attend the carers forum, and they may not want to be in the same kind of meeting with older people. So how are we supporting them?
100% accept that. And I think that's also been the case with all of our involvement work, that the work with young people is so different in flavour and structure that we need to really find new ways of doing that. So we're working with Lisa's Children and Young People Directorate to kind of work with the clinicians to work out how to do that. There are third sector organisations specifically around that, but we need to work with the directorate to kind of get that level of involvement. And I absolutely accept that's the gap.
Thanks very much. Anything else or anyone else on that? Just think, but what's the, just can you sum up again that, sorry, Suzanne, sorry, couldn't see that.
Thank you. I really valued this paper coming to the board. I wanted to ask about the barriers point, because this isn't the first time that we've heard that confidentiality as a kind of formal systemic problem really gets in the way of providing the best care sometimes. And I'm wondering, clearly bringing in the carer's voice could have an impact on this, but what other steps are we taking to ensure that this perennial problem is something that we are tackling?
So we do have, we have regular embedded learning events, but I think the more we move towards, because it's not just limited to carers, I think it's an issue that needs to be understood in around it relates to serious incidents that often comes up in there, that the communication has not happened, complaints likewise. So I think it's a lot to do with developing this learning culture and really skilling our staff up to do this, to focus on that. But I think, I don't know if any other colleagues are working on this, but it's a very serious point. We need to keep working on that because there are warranted fears about confidentiality.
How to accelerate that? Because embedded learning and working on skills, we could be talking about this a year's time easily, couldn't we? I mean, is there any policy? Is there any national policy? Could we give more direct guidance to people?
We have a common sense confidentiality leaflet. So and that's really, really clear. I think it's a lot I think we need much more localized training because the information is there. I think a lot of it is just being very scared when you're talking to a family who might be very angry or the emotions are running high. And I think it's more in that sort of context where we get these problems. Sorry.
Gosh. Yeah, I think mental health in particular kind of raises particular challenges, partly, of course, because the patient themselves kind of insight, depending on their kind of presenting condition, their insight may vary, and therefore how willing they are for information to be shared with their carer or their family also varies. So I think it's very difficult to kind of legislate through a policy, but I think through involvement and kind of early direction in terms of somebody's care, you can find a way through it. I mean, just as a kind of personal anecdote, somebody who I'm personally acquainted for ended up using our mental health crisis services in the last 3 months, and working with her children to kind of help them to navigate the system did really throw up kind of considerable insights into the difficulty of kind of eliciting information in the context of, people's kind of mental state varying quite considerably day to day, hour to hour. So, but it is about that kind of common sense approach, isn't it? That I think you can set out principles of how you share information, which people can then hold on to when they're navigating what are quite choppy waters at times. So I think you just have to keep having those conversations and keep at it.
I completely agree. And it's be worth just mentioning that we do have improving scores on our board network engagement. We also have some improving picture in terms of carers saying that they feel involved and are involved in care planning. So we have indications it's moving in the right direction. Because what I'm trying to say is it is a really stubborn.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks to your team. I think that, and Lorraine and Janice, I thought that was really very, very impactful. Thank you very much indeed for that, Neil. We move on now to board assurance framework, please, Iffy.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Thank you, Chair. So colleagues would have seen that we now have 15 risks on our board assurance framework with the addition of 3 new risks since we met in November. 6 of the 15 are significant, and just for the sake of completion, I'll mention the 3 new risks, which are the Southwest Prisons Service Quality Risk. It is significant. Bexley Private Finance Initiative Risk, which is also significant. And then the Doctors Industrial Action Risk, which is high. And I think everyone would agree that it is right to have certainly the last risk on the bar. You see there are 3 further risks have been removed, and these were removed following the recommendation from the Quality Committee, and they're all being treated as managed risks. As we normally do, I think that in May, we may go through the BAF in some more detail. So I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Iffy. Yeah, first of all, I think good to see some turnover in the BAF, particularly the de-escalations from the Quality Committee and the new ones you put on. And that's still within the, in terms of the 15 number, it still hits the mark for the external auditors, which is good. One thing one item I don't think we've had much opportunity to talk about is just on the ICB 30% reduction in their staff. And I just wonder what your thoughts on, what's the impact of that on us, if we know that? And of course, related to that is, should we think of declaring that as a risk?
That's interesting. I think it's difficult to be confident about the full impact because, of course, the way our ICS has done this is that they've held some vacant positions vacant. So we've kind of been working in that context already. And then there have been some reductions, but I don't think that those have necessarily, they've only just finished a consultation. So we're yet to see what the full impact of that will be. And I know that we're also having discussions that would affect us directly in terms of mental health and what role we will play. But my sense is that whilst quite a bit will be transferred to providers, and we may need to pick up some more, I think we've all been very clear in those meetings that we don't want a situation where providers then do the work that the ICS should be doing. If I had to hazard a guess, I think I would probably say the impact will at best be moderate, certainly not significant. But that's perhaps something that we can look at when there's more clarity about what it would mean for us. My main concern is that it could mean that there'll be fewer people to coordinate things across the ICS, which may have an impact on providers taking a lead role. But that in itself may not be a bad thing, because we've always said what we don't want is more head counts if we can do stuff ourselves.
That's a good point. Anything else from anyone else on that? If not, thanks very much on that. Just a few words for me, because all the significant things Iffy will pick up in his report. But one thing Iffy does mention is around the strike. I think I just want to thank all the team for all their hard work during a very, very challenging time for everybody. Those who were organising things, those who were at work, particularly over this very, very difficult winter period as well. And I know just how much time colleagues put into this late into the night and over the weekends, dealing with some very, very challenging times. So thank you all for everything you put into that. I don't think any board meeting today couldn't fail to mention the post office scandal. We know the focus and we know the facts. Well, we think we know the facts. They focus on the CEO, but quite clearly the next steps, people will start to looking at all the other people involved, including the board, including the chair, the non-execs, and everyone else involved in these matters, and then through to audit committee, through to internal, external auditors. There's a range of people who would probably had a knowledge of some of these issues. And I think it's not for me to underline the importance of what we do, but I am going to, in our role in these things, our role about being inquisitive, being supportive yet challenging, and trust but verify, and this need to continue to, in our role both as execs and non-execs, to inquire into things, to challenge things, to ask questions, because quite clearly, not just in this dreadful scandal, but many of the other matters we've seen of late, there has been a failure of governance. We've done very well in many ways. We are the awards that we've had, and quite rightly so. But I also think that's a time when you really want to be on your mettle. As far as what's happening right underneath our feet when we're doing our visits, when we're having our subcommittee meetings, we're having our board meetings. I think it's incumbent on us all to really think about our role in governance, and that includes the Council of Governors as well. And thank you, Sue, for coming along again today. I think we have a new influx of governors. They're really interesting. I think they're going to be quite challenging, and rightly so. And I want them to be. It is part of the governance of this as a foundation trust that they are. And I think, and I have written to colleagues about how we must pay due respect to the Council of Governors and ensure we have full attendance wherever possible at those meetings, because I think we're going to get an increasing number of questions, and again, rightly so, because that's the way the governance of this organisation works. So a very sobering time, I think, for anyone involved in these matters. And that takes us through the fit and proper person tests, which we've got to do quite rightly again, and making sure they're real and not just a tick box exercise. And there'll be a chance for, we're arranging one-to-ones as a sort of mid-year catch up. And we can talk about those things on the one-to-ones between me and the Neds on that score. But anyone got anything on that matter or any other matters as far as I'm concerned at the moment? If not, thanks very much, and over to you, Iffy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to assume the report and the pack is read, but I just want to draw out a few things, if I may. So, Chair, you've already touched on the industrial action. The longest we've had ended Tuesday morning. Colleagues would also have read or heard of reports of significant patient safety concerns during the strike period. But I'm absolutely certain that the patient safety impact, though there was quite a bit of that during the strike, the impact will be felt much longer further down the months. And the reason I say that is because we all know that clinics were cancelled, elective care was pretty much stopped. And what that then does is that people trip into crises and then end up pitching up at ED. We had challenges here at Oxleas. Abby and I have been talking about some of those, that although we didn't have a higher than usual number of doctors go on the industrial action, we had quite a few who were off sick and a number who had exams to take, and that made covering the rota incredibly difficult. I don't know, Abby, if you want to say any more about that before I continue.
Yeah, I suppose it's worth saying that we had 2 periods of industrial action from the 20th to the 23rd of December, and then from the 3rd to the 9th of January, and with the bridge of Christmas in between that. So we also had seasonal flu and other respiratory infections. So we did have sickness amongst our medical staff. But I suppose it's worth noting that we had a multidisciplinary team response, and the other professional groups were supporting, and we had to increase the number of other professional groups to support the industrial action this time around. And although it's been going on for a year, this has been the most difficult one to cover. And Andy has already alluded to the amount of time it takes. So we knew about the strikes from the 30th of November, and that's all we've planned for up until they've taken place. Lorraine and Ian have attended meetings at South East London. I chair internal meetings on a daily basis when we do have industrial action. So we know, so it's just for you to get an idea of the amount of time it takes, apart from the clinics that get cancelled, the impact on patients, the impact on staff that have been supporting this for the last 1 year, and the fact that for the junior doctors at least, they have sort of said they probably will continue industrial action till September. And that's very, very difficult. So we've got a meeting in South East London next week to discuss patient safety and patient harm, and just to see how we mitigate that. But it's becoming much more cumulative than the increased number of industrial actions we have.
Thank you, Abby. So clearly, if the industrial action continues, I have no doubt the NHS will probably be further on its knees. It's already on its knees in my view, but maybe by then it will be face down. So the other things I wanted to mention, the planning guidance, we still haven't received that, usually published in December. From what I've gathered, it's more to do with discussions between the Treasury and Department of Health and Social Care in the light of the finances. And we hope that this will be available to us before long, but there is already a bit of information that we could be getting on with, and I know Azra and colleagues are already doing that. You'll also see in my paper that I have highlighted an event in November, which ICS, along with partners, pledged to tackle health inequalities. There were quite a number of ambitious pledges made, and I'm not sure whether we're going to, in the light of industrial action and elective difficulties, A&E difficulties, etc., whether we're really going to get to grips with some of those. But it would be good to see the ICS and partners, including ourselves, getting onto some of those items. Do forgive me for highlighting our HSJ Trust of the Year award again and our recognition awards. It's in my paper because this is the first formal board. I know we talked about this at the Strategic Board and the Council of Governors in December, but we do, of course, remain excited about the news, although it's increasingly difficult to say that the meetings have been at since the new year. We are still planning a trust-wide celebration. The exec are still working on this with the wider leadership team. But our hope too is that this will help us ultimately with recruitment and retention, because that for us is really critical if we're going to be able to continue to deliver care to the standards that we would like to. So in my operational summary, you will see that my last paragraph there talks about the ICS forecasting a break-even position. But of course, we knew that was likely to change. It has indeed changed, not just on account of the industrial action, but additional information we only received in the last couple of days or so. That means that we're somewhere away from being able to forecast a break-even position. And Azra and I are going to have to take leave of the board at about 1 p.m. to see if we can hear the latest update. But I'm sure that we'll, whatever we hear, we'll talk some more about in part 2 of the meeting. The final thing that I want to touch on, which is not in my paper, is the Sunday Times publication on the 7th of January titled Britain's Most Dangerous Drug Linked to 400 Deaths a Year. Steve did write to me and the chair about this, and Susan also wrote and did in fact share the article with colleagues. And I know, Susan, you have asked Abby to prepare a paper for the quality committee, but I thought it would be useful for me to just help the board understand what this is all about, if I may. So this is about a drug called clozapine, which first came into use in 1958 and then was withdrawn in the 70s because of significant life-threatening risks, and then returned in late 1988, 1990. And since then, its use, I think its use rose, it's probably plateaued now. It remains the most effective treatment for schizophrenia. But not just every case of schizophrenia, but treatment-resistant schizophrenia, where an individual has failed to respond to at least 2 drugs tried over a period of time. Its effectiveness is such that if it's used in such patients, 50 to 60% of them improve. And that's compared to something like 10% if they carried on other drugs that we have. So that's one reason why it's commonly used. Another reason, of course, is that we know that the condition schizophrenia carries a 10% risk of suicide. And so if you couple that with the fact that clozapine, when first marketed, was reported to carry a 1% risk of mortality, and that mortality is because of its side effect, which is that it reduces bone marrow activity, and in particular, white blood cells that are needed to fight infection. And so when it was licensed for use, the focus was on preventing that, preventing white blood cells from being completely diminished in an individual. And so a monitoring system was put in place with very strict protocols about how you start the medication, the frequency of blood tests, and what you do when the white blood counts begin to drop. So that's still in place. But as time has gone on, we've become more aware of other, some life-threatening, others not so, complications with clozapine. One of the more recent ones over the last 5 to 10 years is the fact that it can completely result in what we call paralytic ileus, which means that the bowels just stop. And people have died from intestinal obstruction. In the early days, when you first started, people can have inflammation of the heart, myocarditis. When people use it for a longer period of time, it can result in enlargement of the heart. And then there are a number of other things that people on this medication experience, particularly weight gain, with the added risk of diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, inactivity, can result in blood clots, etc. And so it's really critical, therefore, that when you have people on this medication, that they are monitored regularly. And we have 560 patients on this medication in Oxleas, and we run what we call clozapine clinics, where they are regularly tested, blood test, ECG, etc. And part of what Abby, I'm sure, will do when she presents a paper to the quality committee is to give the assurance that the staff are skilled, because it's one thing to run a clinic, it's another thing to be able to elicit the information from patients, particularly about constipation, for example, and things like smoking, because when people smoke, the level of clozapine drops. When they stop smoking, the level rises. And so you need to be able to elicit that information. There is also something else that we need to get a grip on in Oxleas, because I don't think it's done routinely, which is the blood level of clozapine. And the reason it's not done routinely is that there's no clear evidence that the blood level can guide therapeutic response. But I think that the blood level should help us in determining whether dangerous levels are being reached, for example, when someone stops smoking, or if they don't take it at all, that the blood level may drop. So quite apart from being licensed for treatment-resistant schizophrenia, practice has drifted into its use outside of license, which means you can, if a patient understands and is agreeable, you can try it in their care. And this is mostly for a condition called schizoaffective disorder and some personality disorders where the risk of violence and suicide are really high. So the context that it's important to mention that because we were mentioned in that article because we had one patient who in 2016 died, and that patient was on clozapine, not for schizophrenia, but for personality disorder. And the issue there where we got a PFD, Preventing Future Deaths Directive from the coroner, and the issue there was that there were doubts about the degree to which the patient had capacity to consent to that treatment, and also whether the treating consultant had adequately gathered all the information, including information from the family about how the patient was doing. At the time, I wrote to, we responded to the coroner, and then I wrote to every single doctor in the trust, requiring them to read the GMC guidelines on how you ensure people have capacity, how you obtain consent, and also the need to ensure you have all the information that you need before proceeding with treatment and also during treatment, and ask that they read those documents and also in their appraisal assure the appraiser that they are up to date on those matters. And Abby and I have agreed that there's perhaps a need in the light of this publication, in the light of the work that she's going to do to assure also that our systems are working, that there may be a need to write again to our clinicians. And then the final thing to say is that we participate in the Prescribing Observatory for Mental Health audit. There is usually an audit on clozapine to check that practices are in line with what's expected, particularly the monitoring. But of course, as I always say, there are things you can tick off in audit, but what we want to do is to really scale our staff up. And I know there's also a training program that the pharmacy team run where we'll make sure that staff who run those clinics really understand the potential risks, because these are not things that patients will necessarily volunteer. You need to really ask the questions and then use measures where possible, weight, blood test, ECG, etc., to guide you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Iffy, any questions for Iffy at all on Stephen?
Thanks, Iffy. And HSJ, we can't say it too often, can we? Fantastic achievement. And as you rightly say, also practical, not just a nice thing, but from recruitment and staff morale. There are great practical advantages. Clozapine, you and I had a quick conversation before just to confirm that certainly South London Maudsley Slam are in very much the same position. And Sir Norman Lamb yesterday was saying we can't do without it, quote unquote. But as you say, with the right processes and still, they're doing a further analysis of it, but that's where they are. We touched on, Andy touched on earlier about the post office situation. Fujitsu obviously do a lot of work with public services. I'd be interested in perhaps Alison's thoughts. I had in the back of my mind, I got a feeling they're involved with EPR, electronic patient records. So it'd be good to have any sort of assurance as to what checks we're doing in that area. I know that's a very difficult area. And finally, NHS providers sent around a very interesting note a couple of days ago about reference to ministerial approval for substantial service reconfiguration. It set me thinking, if we were back in 2017, would we have got the SLP started, under that sort of outcome? And I'm not sure whether that is just a political situation given an election in the next 12 months, or whether that's something a bit more unfortunate for us. But again, I'd be interested in your thoughts as to what impact that has, because looking at it at its worst, that could there's a lot of things would be caught by that phrase, surface reconfiguration. So your thoughts on, does that stop us doing a lot of beneficial, good work? And complex care through the SLP would probably be a good example of that, a complete reconfiguration, which, to remind everybody, saved £9 million and was enormous benefit to all parties.
Thank you, Steve. So on the Fujitsu, I have checked with Alison, and Alice now will invite you to comment. And as far as we know, they are not involved. That said, I think you're right to ask the question, because we know that up and down the country, electronic patient records have been known to cause some difficulties. We heard, I think this was up in Midlands or up north, where thousands of letters were not sent, and patients didn't receive letters inviting them for all sorts of treatment. And we also know more locally in our system that with the implementation of the electronic patient records, there have been some issues that have got in the way of real practical delivery of healthcare, and those issues remain. So I think you're right to ask that question. Regarding the new stuff about ministerial input into reconfiguration, I had read it as if you intend to stop any services, but I'll go back again and look at it. But that said, I don't think that even if this was in place way back in 2017, that it would necessarily have got in the way of what we've done with SLP, because what we have done with SLP is to come together to improve services. We haven't necessarily altered the way it's been delivered unless there is evidence, as we've done in the offender health pathway, as you know. And in fact, as we sit here today, we've just completed some templates for NHS England, who are asking us to give an update of where we've got to, because there's a plan to give us an additional 3 years funding for provider collaboratives. And much of that has been about what improvements we've made over and above where we started, which is good. And I think on that front, certainly, it's all very positive. No question in my mind. And I'll be surprised if anyone at all will challenge the work we've done there. But I think going forward, this will be really interesting. And I'm not sure whether this is just political or if indeed there have been some bigger reconfigurations elsewhere where there have been huge fallouts, and whether that's what's resulted in this. But we'll see how it unfolds. Yeah. Comment on Fujitsu.
Yeah. From Fujitsu don't provide any of our EPRs. We've also just checked our information asset registers to make sure there's nothing in services that we should be aware of. And finance have also done a check about supplier invoices. So we're certain that we don't have any kind of relations with them.
A couple of things. Firstly, I used to work for Fujitsu, so I'll get that on the record, just in case anyone didn't know. But I left in 2001. I had no involvement in the Horizon contract. But I felt obliged to say that. Secondly, the ICS leaders' pledges that you referred to, I can see how some of the things that, and I know it's only the bullet points, fit in with the ICS strategy, but some of it feels like it's going way beyond, almost tiptoeing into sort of more of a political kind of agenda as well. If we as a trust had put something like that out, then we as the board would have approved that, and we would expect to have a whole plan to show what we were doing and how we were going to measure whether we were successful or not. So I guess my question is there something like that at the ICS? And then my second question relates to the new standard contract. And the penultimate bullet says, ensure all staff receive training on learning disability and autism appropriate to their role. I was interested in whether that is a new thing or whether it's always been in the contract. And in particular, who decides what's appropriate? Because I think when we sit in mortality committee and we look at the feedback from leader reports, the focus needs to be on people who probably don't think it's part of their role.
that's where services often fall down. So
Okay, so on the ICS, I'm not confident that there is this sort of plan that we would put together within Oxleas to demonstrate what needs to be done and how we are tackling those. Because as I sit here, I'm not even sure that our strategy, which has been agreed, that such a comprehensive plan has been put together yet. I think Sally will probably comment in terms of meetings she's been at developing the ICS strategy. So, and to think that this is over and above that, you know. So we'll see. I think there's going to be another one of these later this year, probably around November, where the question will be asked, where have we got to? But I'm sure we'll do some, but not all. So when you think about housing, for example, it's not for health to get involved in providing housing. Your second question, I think that's a new thing. I'm trying to think about the law, what it's called now. I know that's right, the training. And I've been in meetings where we've been trying to determine what it would mean, you know, how do you make sure that people do it, etc. And so that is new. And you are right that people who work perhaps in Lorraine's team will have a great deal of understanding, but it's more people who don't, who are some way removed. And how do we make sure that those people are adequately trained to understand the needs of people with learning disability and autism?
Other questions, please? Rachel.
Just can't resist. Sorry. The opportunity for a plug for the Oliver McGowan training. It is really good. It is lengthy, but it is really good. And I think it's really important for us in our leadership role that we do the training and encourage those around us to do it as well. There's been quite a lot to kind of get this up and running, and it hasn't been the most straightforward process, but it is really good training and I'd recommend it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. It's taken an awful long time, hasn't it, to come out? It does make you wonder what's happened in the interim, if it was so important, why it took so long. I know it's not your fault, but the system to announce it and then mandate after so long, you think that's just extraordinary. If it was so important, this should have been put out an awful lot earlier. Anyway, there we are. It's a good plug for the training, so thank you for that. Anything else at all from Iffy? If not, we'll go over to Ian, please.
Thank you, Chair. So colleagues will have read the detailed directorate operational report in the reading room. I just wanted to highlight two things from that, which are mentioned on the front sheet. One is the positive work being undertaken within the Adult Learning Disability Directorate to get on top of demand for adult ASD assessments. And then the second thing, which I think is pertinent to raise, given the earlier discussion around risks on the BAF, the positive recent inspection at HMP Exeter, which I think is important to raise and kind of is testament to a huge amount of work going on down there to get on top of what are in some cases quite historical issues. On top of, in addition to that, I just wanted to raise 3 or 4 things. You'll note on the front sheet that I've provided a further update on right care, right person. I think when I reported on it at the last board, I think it had only been in operation for about a week or so. So we're now 2 months post implementation. So far, rollout continues to have gone reasonably smoothly. There is still work left to be completed, and I've kind of listed some of that on the front sheet. Oxleas continues to be very involved in that overall London implementation, with both myself and Abby leading subgroups, and Aisling leading some of the policy, detailed policy work. And it's even led to a myriad of speaking engagements that I've now got to undertake in the next few weeks. I wanted to highlight the fact that the bed recovery programme has now started in earnest, and I think detailed updates have come to both the Quality Committee and the Business and Infrastructure Committee. The challenges remain around our beds. We're seeing a high use of private beds in the last few months, although it's important to note that admissions in the last 6 months are lower than the previous 6. And importantly, because I think this is a kind of an important building block of the whole programme, length of stay has decreased in the last 2 months, with 53% of patients currently staying less than 45 days. Having said that, our clinically ready for discharge was the highest in December that it has been for the last 12 months. The majority of that is within older adult services, but there is a significant number within working age adults as well. And I think the agreement that we've kind of got to internally is that, and in discussion with colleagues at SLAM, is that we really need to have that discussion and kind of escalate it a bit further with the wider system. One of the things I didn't mention, but in the front sheet, but I thought it would be helpful just to acknowledge, is our continued work around armed forces and veterans. I'm pleased to say that the coordinator post that we've been trialling for the last year, it's now been agreed to fund that recurrently, and we're just in the process of recruiting to that permanently. Timing is apt because this week saw the official launch of Op Courage, which, if colleagues aren't aware, this is around the specialist pathway for mental health treatment and support for veterans. In London, this is being led through Camden and Islington, but we have now a post within the SLP which acts as a kind of coordination from our local services of the 3 trusts up into that more specialist programme. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight that trust-wide demand remains high across all our directorates, although we saw the usual seasonal decrease in December. And I think it's really important to highlight that half of all the referrals that come into Oxleas go to adult community physical health. And colleagues will be aware that through our subcommittees, we've highlighted some of the impact that is having on our services, particularly around district nursing. But I have invited Sarah along today to talk about the work that her directorate are doing and its importance, not only for the patients that they're seeing, but its wider importance in supporting the system and some of those pressures, particularly at this time of year, that are experienced within acute services. So I'll hand over to Sarah, and then probably best to take questions at the end.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, in relation to district nursing, I mean, I think it's an accumulative effect of post-pandemic, where we've not seen a decrease in activity and ongoing pressures in the system. So we are supposed to be seeing around 19,000 people a month between Bexley and Greenwich. We're averaging between 23 and 25,000 contacts with patients, which is extraordinarily high. We are working with our system partners in looking at how we can address that activity in different ways in both of the boroughs, and we're looking at things we've had some success with. We will be taking GPs will take on the activity of long-term condition blood tests in Greenwich, and we've just done an audit in Bexley around referrals from our GPs, and our we taking the right patients who are housebound into that service so that we manage in the right way? So we continue that work locally to support our district nurses, and in order that we can then also support the system when there's huge activity at the acute hospitals, either due to industrial action or indeed just due to pressures within the system because of people being very unwell in the winter period with different infections. We've got a number of initiatives that we're working on. We've got the virtual ward programme where we've seen 1,200 admissions in the Bexley programme, over 2,000 admissions in the Greenwich programme over the various pathways to keep people at home. The aim of that project is that people don't go to the front door of the hospital, that those pathways that we've initiated keep people at home, but we will also, if people do make it to the front door, quickly take people away from the front door through our IV pathways, our physio pathways, frailty pathways, to bring people back into the community as quickly as possible. We also are developing with our LAS partners. We are working on the potential for an LAS paramedic car in which our staff from our JET and Rapid Urgent Crisis Response Service will be with the paramedics, and therefore we'll be able to take patients directly from the stack so that they don't there's not a delay in getting to those patients, and we can get straight to those patients in the community. We're also working on a diagnostic pathway with QEH in that we can access diagnostics rapidly when we're working with people at home, so that again they don't enter that front door, but we can access the use of their services to keep people at home, and that they're not having to go to A&E to get the diagnostics that they previously would have had to have gone for. We have our Meadowview beds where we've seen our activity and throughput increase by our reduction of our length of stay. It's averaging around 18 to 19 days now, so that we keep that throughput going. I think our work with our system is ensuring that where referrals come, they come to us in a timely way from our acute, and we're also supporting with therapy to go in and help with those assessments where necessarily, so we can move people through the system more quickly. So hopefully what I've been highlighting is the work we are trying to do is really work with partners to keep people at home, and where there are any system issues, we go in and are helping support our colleagues in other areas.
Thank you, Sarah. So how would, if someone's taken to ED, then would your people go to ED to go and see that patient?
We have 2 navigator nurses who I didn't mention, who are ex-district nurses that we employ, who work in A&E, who are there daily to pull people out who we see could work onto many of our other pathways, be that goes back to district nursing or indeed have an IV pathway in the community. So they are there. We also have therapists going in. We've got 2 therapists who are going in also into ED to also help support people and bring them out more quickly. Those roles also extend to the back door of the hospital. So should there be issues, that we're working with the wards in the hospital to ensure they're familiar with the pathways for referrals out as well. I think the interesting to acknowledge is that we're not just working with QEH, we are working with Prue and Darren Hospital as well, which sits outside of that South East London system. So I think it's important to acknowledge that.
I think this is really, really interesting stuff. I'll take some more questions first. Jo, please.
No, I was just building on that. I mean, from the visits that Iffy and I have done with Sarah's directorate, there's huge demand, but there's also enthusiasm because there's lots more we can do. There's been loads of service changes, and my sense is we implement service changes pretty quickly, a little bit on the cheap often because there isn't a lot of money flowing around, and we just need to continue to escalate this issue with the ICS to get proper funding on these services, because we can do more. But we need to be able to work well with the acute hospitals. So getting test results, for example, if we're treating someone at home, is really important. So I just think we need to continue to raise the profile of this and put our foot down on a number of things, because there's even more opportunities to do stuff. And we've even been successful on recruitment on district nurses. I mean, I know, we've still got lots of gaps, but they've done incredibly well to get the workforce in. So there's it's really exciting, all the stuff that's going on. I'm amazed that you can keep your finger on the pulse, to be honest. There's so many things and there's more opportunity, but we can't be doing it on the back of a fag packet all the time.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Just to kind of follow up on that. Often the kind of view of the system comes through acute because obviously expensive resource, and we need to kind of make sure that that's treating the people that it needs to. But I think because of that, some of that preventative work that Sarah's teams are doing doesn't have the same profile. I think there's now the re-establishment of the A&E delivery board for Greenwich and Bexley in relation to QEH, and I think there's an opportunity there, which it's only been meeting for about 3 months, but there is an opportunity to kind of raise the profile of the work that we do. And I think Sarah and I are very keen as well to kind of maximise what is a good relationship with QE to try and get some of those pathways working optimally. But I just wanted to ask Sarah, you mentioned about often we do only think about the kind of activity we do with QH, but could you just give us an idea of the kind of proportion of the activity that is coming through DVH? I think that's probably slightly more than the PRU, but it would be good to kind of draw that out into the open for colleagues.
So the proportion of activity for Bexley colleagues with Darrant is about 30%. So 50% being QEH, 30% at Darrant Valley Hospital, and 20% roughly at the PRU. And that doesn't include other hospitals outside that system that we also work with and drawing patients from as well.
Just specifically picking up the point that you were saying around commissioners, we have Sarah coming along to those meetings along with myself and Ian, and we are raising this issue. But I think we just need to recognise there is something like a 25% overspend on the district nursing just by itself, while we're trying to maintain and develop those other new services. So we have very strongly put that in terms of the 24-25 planning for next year. But as you can imagine, finances are going to be incredibly tight for next financial year. So I think we're going to have a very detailed view in terms of that annual planning for next year in terms of investment and whereabouts we can place that.
Thanks, Ezra. And I'd like Ahmed to come in now, please. Hand up.
Thank you very much, Andy. Apologies, everyone, for being remote and being without camera. I'm really, really privileged to be working with Sarah and her teams doing this brilliant work. I just wanted to draw your attention to maybe another area for improvement, which is the clinicians in LGT. I put it in the chat. Letting go of the patients. So we have the fora, we have the discussions. There are some challenges. So, for example, a lot of the consultants in LGT in the areas where we can pull patients are agency locum consultants, and the nature of their tenure is that they don't take as much risk as they should, maybe more risk averse. So not all of our occupancy is used up, despite having robust, mutually agreed pathways. Some of the time is simply because the clinicians, particularly in QEH, hang on to their patients a bit more and want to treat them further in hospital. But that's something we're working on with them and through the wider system and through the newly established clinical cabinet as well. Just wanted to bring that to your attention as well. Thank you.
Well, that's a really good point, and thanks for that. And very good to hear you back, Ahmed, if not see you, but good to see you. Thank you. Stephen, please.
Yeah, thanks for very comprehensive reports and a lot of excellent activities going on there. One observation, one question. Like Joe, I thought the nursing recruitment actually, given all our vacancy problems, and everywhere right around the NHS, but that's very noticeable. So my question is, just how did you do that? A little bit more detail. It'd be really interesting in what's done elsewhere. And then secondly, just I'm glad Ian touched on Op Courage, just as a bit of general information. Since that started in 2017, it's had 30,000 service users, so it provides enormous support to veteran groups, and about in last year 4,500. So it's very consistent and very much appreciated. But the question, yes, nursing recruitment, how did you do it?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so I think this has been a concerted effort. So we have got a focused service manager who's been working around district nursing and really working hard with our HR partners to attend as many of the outside events that we can. We've just short of halved the vacancy rate since January. By the time we get all the new starters, it's just under the half. But it's still a phenomenal achievement. They've been interviewing at these recruitment events, so they've not waited for people to apply. They've actually done the recruitment there and then, and they've been giving up their weekends in order to attend these events, or outside of working hours in order to go along. We've also been promoting what a great place it is to work. Oxleas is a great place to work, and that we have got the achievements that we've won, and that's because of the things that we do internally, being recognised as the best place to work, and drawing down on those, because it does attract people to come to work for us. We are also a great trainer, so there's lots of opportunities around training, but we are competing, and it is important to recognise that, with lots of other local partners who are also looking for district nurses. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the fantastic achievement that we've had in that area.
Well done, Sarah. Thank you. Suzanne, were you coming?
So I had a couple of questions, and one is really for Ian about right care, right person, and the other is for Sarah about the hospital at home, or virtual wards, or whatever we choose to call them. On right care, right person, I think what's been really interesting about this is I was very sceptical at the beginning, and I thought that branding it right care, right person was just a euphemistic way of the Met trying to discharge work onto other partners. But the original right care, right person was intended to have better outcomes for patients. So I'm just wondering whether you can, whether we're able to see that may be one of the benefits that's coming from it, or whether we're not really able to see that yet. The question for Sarah was, I was really interested that the Health Foundation published some research recently on public perceptions of hospital at home stroke virtual wards, and they pointed out there's a lot of confusion about what those mean, and the public isn't entirely sure. But there was quite a significant proportion of public opinion which suggested that they wanted to be in hospital. They didn't feel safe at home. They didn't have people to look after them. And it does seem to me that connecting with our carer discussion earlier on, that providing this kind of care for people at home does rely on informal carers as well. So I'm just wondering how we're measuring the patient experience that we're able to provide in that kind of pathway.
Thanks, Suzanne. So in terms of the patient experience, our pathways for our virtual wards are part of ongoing, we're extending existing pathways. So what we need to do is be able to draw down the specifics of, is a virtual ward part of the pathway, or indeed elsewhere. However, what we have done, we've got our service user reference group, and we brought in service users to talk through their experiences, or indeed people they support's experiences of the programme, or also what it means to them. And one of the things that we did find was that people assume that it means they're going to be left at home, and it is virtual, i.e. no one will see them, and it will be done by technology. And whilst technology is a part of what we're doing, and we're going to be developing that, it's not that people are on their own. It's quite an intensive pathway where there's a lot of one-to-one support from clinicians at home when they are supported. And there are different programmes of virtual wards depending on where you are, and ours is very much, you're already at home, we're going to keep you at home, rather than you've gone to hospital and we're pulling you back out again. So I think that's an important distinction for us. Other areas are doing the pull out of hospital, where people might feel a little bit more insecure about what that means coming out of that hospital setting into the community.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, in relation to right care, right person, I think you're right to highlight something that I think got lost in around the kind of implementation, which is that essentially what Right Care, Right Person was doing was reinforcing what should have been existing practice, but had drifted over time, which is that health and social care should be incorporating things like welfare checks and making efforts to locate people who are AWOL as part of existing practices, but it had drifted. And similarly, I don't think anybody could argue that reducing the number of conveyances under Section 136 isn't a good thing. In terms of whether we're able to kind of measure a positive impact, so my colleague Jen Allen, who is the COO at South West London and St George's, she's chairing a subgroup which is looking at collecting data across health, social care, and importantly, the police. Because again, a positive thing that's come out of that is that each agency collects information. We're not very good at kind of triangulating it and cross-referencing it. So getting the kind of infrastructure and the data set correct is what is being focused on at the moment. And then hopefully in time we will be able to then share data that demonstrates the kind of outcome of this initiative. So I think we'll be able to feed back in a bit more detail, Suzanne, some of the things that you're asking about. And when we get it, it would be useful, I think, to kind of maybe take that back through the MH log. Yeah.
Jim, please.
Thanks for reporting in. Very quick question on the Section 136 hubs. The data shows the quality as well, that the proportion of non-BBG patients have gone up in HBOS, but our BBG patients have gone down. Any drivers for that?
Yeah, so I've something that's been preoccupying me. So is it that, as you say, BBG, the number of BBG patients has just gone down, which would be great, or are they being taken elsewhere and I'm not seeing it? So Aisling has been doing some work to try and get that information. I mean, every trust has experienced this, and it's a kind of, it probably could have been foreseen that this would happen. I think we haven't got the kind of exact data, Jim, but I think there is a sense that patients are being conveyed elsewhere, but the overall numbers probably have reduced slightly. But we're just working on that through we've got a kind of Section 136 kind of meeting, which is a South London meeting, and then that links into North London. So I should be able to bring back more detail in due course. But it's very noticeable, the numbers of patients from outside our immediate area that are coming to us. Yeah.
And that is an interesting one, isn't it? Is it because we're good at telling people we're open and we've got space? Because, I mean, it's better for the Met, isn't it, in the sense they can just take someone somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, everything comes through the hubs now. There's one for South London, one for North London. The South London one is managed via SLAM, so it's but they're doing that on behalf of South London. So I think it's open and transparent, the access to all of the suite. It's dependent on our individual suites reporting throughout the day what their status is. So that's still that was something we were trialing before the hubs. So throughout the day at various points, we have to kind of say to the system, say to the hubs, this is our current situation in terms of capacity. So as long as that is happening, then we can be confident that people are being directed to the right resource. Overall, yes. Yeah.
Is the fact that they're not BBG, does that delay their transfer?
It does. I mean, under the compact, what should happen is that those patients should be admitted to a local bed and repatriated. But as we know, given the pressures in the system, we're not they will be behind. There will be in a queue for beds, which also includes our own BBG patients. So in reality, they are going to be waiting for repatriation, and that can take longer. But I don't. And yeah, I mean, we look at the detail every month, and most of our long stays in HPOS now, because BBG numbers are going down, proportionally higher number of people from outside BBG, they're more likely to be waiting longer. So yeah.
And well done on this. I mean, some really good progress and good work.
In terms of the process of bringing people in, does that factor in whether their locality, or is that just based on availability?
It's purely based on availability. So in the early days of Right Care, Right Person, it was quite a change when we were getting conveyances from, say, Euston Station of somebody that's from Scotland because they've just arrived in London. So we are kind of getting people from all over the country coming in. Although it may be delaying they may be then delayed in health-based place of safety. I think one of the really important things to hold on to is that through this we have significantly reduced the number of conveyances to ED, which is a positive thing, because clearly they are not environments which are necessarily suitable for people who are acutely distressed. So that is a kind of tangible benefit of this of the implementation of the hubs.
Yes, to anyone else? If not, I mean, thanks very much indeed, Ian. That's really helpful. And Sarah, thank you. I thought it was really helpful. I think we'd like to hear more in due course at the appropriate time. I'd certainly like to see the process, I suppose, about how does this actually work, who goes where, when, and how, and looking at any change in the number of people who've managed to get out of ED and any other indicators that you use in there. Anyone that's visited ED will know that it's often just full of old people, and every corner you look when you go in, sometimes you do think to yourself, what is the right place for this person? And as a non-clinician looking around, I don't think this place is. And anything you and your staff can do, I really applaud what you've been doing. It's great progress, and huge congratulations on the recruitment in a really tough environment as well. So thanks for coming and thanks for that input. I'd definitely like to hear more again. How are we doing, folks? Do you want to break now, or yeah? Okay, I'm looking at some indicators. Yes, okay. All right, very quick one, please. Thank you. Thanks very much. If we go on to the board visits now, we spent quite a bit of time on those other issues, because I think it's really important. It's a really good discussion. So we'll move these a little more briskly. And I think the first one we come to is Jim, with one from last spring.
Apologies, it's taken quite a while to get through to the board. But yes, we had the first prison visit to the Dorset cluster last March. And to be frank, a lot of it was clouded by the consultation at the time, and the issues around 2P, practice issues, payments, etc. It was quite good that Lawrence was there, because Lawrence was able to fast track a lot of those issues and deal with them quite immediately, which did bring the temperature down within the room, and allowed us to start talking to the teams about the benefits of Oxleas, which they hadn't really appreciated, and the benefits in terms of having a wider network, being connected to a wider prison cluster, and experts in the area, which went down really well. The temperature there was a lot lower than it was at Bristol. We went to Bristol, and a lot more willing to engage with Oxleas going forward. And I think that's come through with what we've seen with the prison inspection. In general, what was really good was the governors all had a really positive. Staff less so sometimes, but the governors really well so. So I think we worked really well with the governors. Again, a really positive response from the prison staff as well. In general, the issues were generally around changes with the different prison infrastructure and environment. What the solution to that is, we don't know, but it is a perennial problem. And what's really positive also was from the prison governors was around us being very flexible around medication and how we worked with the prisons around the medication, because medication and the delivery of medication is a really big.
I don't know if you got a chance to see that, Jim, which is where the a selection of the prisoners actually counsel. They're trained counsellors, aren't they, basically? But it started in Swaleside. I think it's been extended elsewhere, hasn't it? And it's a fantastic arrangement. Is it still known as that, though?
But we're coming up later.
Thanks very much. Back to you, Stephen, please.
Yes, this so probably my second visit to finance, I think, in the last year. These were all the people that we saw, in fact, to join within the last 12 months or so. It was great from that perspective to compare. I really do mean great to compare their experience at Oxleas compared to their previous organisations, without exceptions. They all thought we were a marvellous organisation. The first couple of paragraphs that I'm quoting are more or less direct quotes from what they said. They see us as good organisation, good staff, and the whole recruitment process was tremendous. So all very, very positive.
Good, and thanks very much for visiting. It was often some of our headquarters departments get a bit missed out, and I think it's really good to meet with them. Thank you. We go on to the next one. Joe, please, for district.
So this is there's two reports here for IFE and my visit to through the district nursing team. So an interesting differences between them because they're right next to each other. I think if we'd asked the team prior to the visit how the temperature would vary in each of the team visits, it would have been the opposite way around to what we found. So the second visit we did, which is first in the pack, is the Barnard team, which I think in the past have been vocal, I think, on various things. And we saw them second, and we nearly didn't see them because we spent quite a long time on the other team. And they were desperate, and they hadn't quite painted the walls, Andy. I know you're used to that, but there was tea, biscuits. We were forced to eat biscuits. They were a very content team. They had really benefited from recent recruitments. I think they were pretty much up to full capacity. They're the team that deals with a lot of the care homes, and they felt that they had the right level of staff. Had a very strong team manager, and you just saw that the dynamics in the team, they were completely on top of their game. Really good to see. We asked them the usual question about the Guardian service, which they really had to be prompted to come up with, despite the fact that the poster was just there. I think that sometimes is a problem with good, strong teams with a good manager, because I think in many ways they think, well, the only, if we had an issue, we just discuss it in the team or with the manager or whatever. So, they had to be prompted, but a good visit. So the first team we went to, which is the second report, was the Oval team. So in contrast, they hadn't had much in the way of new recruitment coming in. They didn't have that many vacancies. They were stressed though. They had the amount of visits they're doing very strong. And there'd been a change of manager. I think their manager had gone to the other team. So the manager in place had only been there a few days. And I think it really showed the fragility of morale when you're working under that stress. An email had come in, which after a while they started talking about, and but you could see it was colouring responses. Lisa did some investigation. So it was from the Directorate's Quality Department in relation to a issue with a particular patient. A fairly straightforward, but not particularly carefully worded email had come into the team leader. As an experienced team leader, she'd bounced that to the team, and that had caused, when you're feeling really stressed, really negative response to it, that people don't think we know how to do our job, etc., etc. So it just shows the importance of getting that communication right, making sure you know who the audience is, etc. So a sort of number of issues there. Some particular issues around how bank staff were treated. So we had a sort of fairly permanent bank member of staff there who hadn't been given an alarm. That's just wrong. She should have had an alarm. She was going out single-handedly to visits, etc. And then also a view, again, from the healthcare assistants in the team, that they could do more with this. They had skills that they could do more with. And I know the Directorate was looking at that. I think this lady had worked in a care home where she'd administered drugs, you know, with minimal training. Whether that's right or wrong or indifferent, I think you could discuss. And then in her current role, you couldn't do that. You know, she wasn't doing that. So I know the directorate is looking at use of competencies. All the actions largely were in train anyway. Again, perhaps the need for better communication, but probably explained by the fact they hadn't had a team manager. But yeah, quite a contrast between the two of them.
Yeah, that is interesting. But I'm just trying to put these actions, and they're not just for this one, but other ones as well. How are we capturing these actions, and how do we know they're being done?
So all the actions are captured onto a spreadsheet, and Sue liaises with the service directors to make sure, or the corporate directors to make sure they're taken forward. They're discussed at the service directors meeting, and we review completion. And I'll be bringing an update to the next board meeting just to confirm any outstanding.
Yeah, thanks, Sally, because there's a lot of stuff there, isn't there? And I don't want to create a massive bureaucracy, but just closing that loop is really good. Thank you for that. Stephen, back to you. Can you understand it?
Thank you. So obviously we start with that beautiful photo, which has made myself, Lorraine and Jane look a lot taller and slimmer. If you can get past the photo, I think the essence of this, and it was a changing, you know, milestone moment for me, even though I've been with Neil to many of these similar visits, is actually on page 2, the mission statement. Because you've got the first, which is very short, and the first 3 lines there, beautifully written mission statement. We would have all signed it off and said how good it was. And then when you read the second one, which is a lot simpler and was written by the Can You Understand It team, but actually for that group of patients, it actually says it all, and it's much easier to understand. And to me, that sort of said everything about the value of having co-production. So I really applaud Neil and the team for putting that together. Yeah, it was a good meeting. You could see certainly from the service users involved, for them, this is they're providing a very valuable contribution and oversight on the communications that we produce, and they've done lots of other work, haven't they, on videos for videos of accessing this hospital, you know, and the things you need to do. So they've done a lot of sort of good groundwork on that, and they personally as well, you can see this improves and enhancing their lives, I think, would be because they feel like they're actually doing something, and they are, which is important to other service users and to us as an organisation. So, Lorraine and Jane, I don't know if there's anything you want to add in there. Yeah, lovely. It's a good word. Yeah.
So, Steve, thank you so much for drawing attention to the mission statement. I often say, and this surprises me, that the NHS is moving so far away from plain English. It's unbelievable. You know, you read that stuff and you're thinking, what exactly are they trying to say? You read the second and it's as clear as, and we need a team to help us do this. Amazing. Sorry.
Now, they're a really interesting lot as well, aren't they? I think they're a great lot. And they've done a lot of work in this place too, on signage around the building and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, a really interesting and very, very helpful group of people. I think we're still with you, Stephen, on Bexley Adapt, aren't we?
Yes, Adapt down in Bexley. Rachel C will be pleased here. This is a good example of a WhatsApp group. You said to us, you said to us before, didn't you? Not what all WhatsApp groups are bad. And I think this is a good example of one that's working very effectively. Very positive team environment here. It was kind of interesting that there was a lot of positive things about how they all support one another. They love working for Oxleas, but also towards the end of our meeting, where they were making these comments that work is so stressful and everyone is drowning. So it's kind of, you can take what you like out of this, that in fact they're a very well functioning team, working very hard, love working together, love working for us, but by the same token, never get complacent, because they
Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity of what the kind of report highlights to plug the work that Lorraine and the directorate are doing around the ADAPT pathway, because for a long time it's felt like that the ADAPT teams have had to kind of operate almost as a catch-all for mental health demand, which doesn't fit into a kind of psychosis pathway. And I think through some work to really kind of define what it's there to do, plus the introduction of the hub, there are the early kind of indications that demand is starting to reduce into ADAPT, and that they are able to kind of provide a much more focused work with those people that they are seeing. Having said that, I think Bexley, the relationship between secondary and primary care, and I don't know if Lorraine, this is fair or not, but it feels to me that there's a slightly different relationship, which means that people are more with a mental health condition are more likely to be referred into secondary care. And I think that's, so it's kind of putting this into kind of that wider context. There's quite a lot of work to be done to kind of right size the service really, and make sure it's really focused on those people that need it.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Stephen. Jim, please, London Pathway Partnership.
Thanks, Chair. This was a really interesting visit to an area that I hadn't known we work in. So the London Pathway Partnership, for those that don't know, is a partnership between 4 trusts and supporting people who meet the criteria for offender personality disorder and then who transition into the community. So it's quite a specific piece of work, but it covers individuals with really complex needs. And what surprised me was that these individuals constitute, I think the figures are in the paper, 15% of male prisoners and 20% of female prisoners. So it's quite a large population that they cover of really complex needs. It was a really comprehensive review that we went through. We went through the strategy for the next 5 years for the partnership, and we went through their quality framework, which is at 87 points. The quality framework, really detailed. So it's excellent work that's going on. And we even had the governor of Swaleside come down to talk to us, take time out from his diary to come down and talk to us about how important this is in Swaleside. So in Swaleside, we have the PIPE facility of 60 offenders in there, and they work, and we actually had the ability to talk to 2 of them or 3 of them by video link, which is really interesting. And these are offenders who actually help others in the prison, but also have said to us how important them being mentors actually help themselves. So it's really excellent work. The challenges that they found were around staff support and burnout. So dealing with the complex individuals, the staff feel very pressured, and they're working on that. And obviously working with the probation service with its current issues. But my only question was, where does it's the first time I heard about the LPP, so where does it report into our governance structure? Because they talked about they had a governance report from Deloitte, which came up with sort of which they passed comprehensively, but I hadn't heard about it. So I'm just quite interested as which committee they come under, and how does that come through to us as a board, because it's excellent work.
That's a good question. Yeah, does it come through to should it come through to quality?
I mean, it's part of the Forensic and Offender Healthcare Directorate, so I would expect anything that needs to be reported on LPP would come through that route. But happy to debate about whether it needs to be made a bit more explicit. I mean, it's a partnership approach, obviously.
I suppose it's how does it come up to the board, I suppose, that is the issue. I would have Suzanne, I mean, everything goes to the quality committee, doesn't it?
Through Suzanne committee, I'm afraid.
I noticed that this was due to be bottomed out by the 15th of December, but I've not had a discussion with Lawrence about it. I don't know whether Ian has. I suspect that it might have fallen a bit between the gaps because it's a partnership piece of work, but I will check up on it.
Yes, if we could answer that one, that's in due course, I'd be grateful. Thanks. Joe, please.
I think it might be useful. You know, we're always stacking up our agendas for our away days, isn't it? But what the LPP does, and we've just won, we've re-won a new contract, and potentially I think there's some extra work that might be coming through on LPP. But it's really interesting work. But for, it is true partnership. And I once visited. I think as part of LPP, we run a hostel, I think, which is for people who have served really long prison sentences, and for them to find a way of living in the outside prison community, which that transition is incredibly hard for people. It's probably one of the best board visits I ever did, with people chasing us down because they'd forgotten something else positive they wanted to talk to us about in terms of people we were working with. But I think from a governance perspective, I think it's interesting. I've never seen any issues with it, which is great, but I couldn't tell you how it works. And also the risk profile. So if I take, if people have been in prison for over 20 years, it's not shoplifting. So, we're working with a potentially high risk offender group, doing some really difficult things. So, it would be good perhaps to just spend a bit of time for us all to get a common understanding of how that works, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea, good point. So we'll bring it forward to the next one of our meetings. Anything else on Abby, please?
I will check that out, but it's highly unlikely they will only be under the LPP pathway. They'll probably be under the forensic community team as well. So that's where probably their activity will be. I think it's the intervention from the LPP, but they'll probably be with it somewhere else within the pathway.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Stephen.
Yes, just touching on what Jim was saying actually about Swell's side, but particularly about the councillors, lest we ever forget the value we provide. On a visit I made there many years ago, one of the councillors who was in for grievous bodily harm, so in for a long sentence, sort of thing that Joe described, and he said how he was determined when he came into the prison to end his life. His life had been terrible, no point in carrying on. He's, as soon as I can end it in the prison, I will do so. He became one of our councillors, and in his words, he said, Oxleas has saved my life and changed my life around, because when I come out, I want to do some work in the community. So I know in one sense it's only one person, but it really does touch on that value of, having councillors, the value they provide, but how it does affect them as well. It improves their lives, and they come out, I think, making a contribution, not detrimental to society.
I think it's really, really helpful. Thanks for that. So there's two things here. One, how do we report through? And the second one is hearing more about this at one of our next strategic days. Thanks ever so much indeed. Thanks for all the work on that. I think Sally will be putting something out soon, won't you, on the pairings for visits and processes afterwards and timeliness, etc. in due course. But thanks everyone for all those visits that you've done. And we're going to now move on to the next item on the strategy update, Great Out of Hospital Care. And Abby, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to take the paper as read, and people have already stolen a bit of my thunder today anyway, because Sarah has discussed what's been happening in acute physical health, and Ian's discussed what's happening with ADAPT. It's worth saying that Great Out of Hospital Care is an umbrella for a number of projects and the things that we're doing within the community to ensure our patients get the most appropriate care. So a few things that I want to draw your attention to is CYP and the kind of crisis pathway and the DBT team and the impact that that's had on admissions and bed days, and also in terms of the benefit that young people have had from it, especially the DBT team, and what we will be doing in March, coming up to the 3 years of the strategies, that we've done a few impact videos of the different things that have taken place within Greater Out of Hospital Care, because Steve has just mentioned that even if you make the difference to one person, although I'm not saying that we only made a difference to one person, that does demonstrate the impact. We do have data around outcomes generally, but it's also, I've always been interested in the impact of what we do, and you only get to know that by hearing patient stories. And I've heard a few because I've been out and about to see some of the projects. So essentially that was all I was going to say, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Abby. I thought it was a really good update, actually. Just a couple of questions. One is about DBT. I mean, it's phenomenal. I've seen some provisional data, and it's really phenomenal results. So I was wondering, and I like the fact that you're sort of then doing kind of this follow-up stuff going on that keeps that group, I guess, on the straight and narrow. So I was wondering to what extent what we've done on that, is there an opportunity to scale it up? Is there a group that we can help? My second question is in relation to the mental health hubs. And I don't know if you could do a very sort of quick sketch of where were we, where are we now, and where's the ambition, just so I can understand that journey. Thank you.
With the mental health hub, I'll start with that. We will try and do that, but we can't do like for like, because the mental health hub is a partnership. So it would mean we would have to look at data across the different organizations and what they had. I will try, and I'll speak to Lorraine about that to see whether there's anything we can do about that. DBT, the plan is to scale it up, and it will depend on staff and personnel who can deliver it, but that is the plan, because that is a very effective intervention for young people and prevents them going onto our adult pathway. So yes.
And just on the mental health hubs, I wasn't necessarily asking unusually for sort of hard data. It's more an illustration of what sort of thing are we, they didn't used to exist, they now exist, this is the sort of stuff we're doing, but reading the updates, we're not there yet in terms of where our ambition is. So, if I rolled forward 3 years, it would be good to see what role we think they can perform, and then I guess we can then derive what we estimate the impact to be. Thank you.
Can I just come in? So this is something Lauren and I have discussed in terms of painting a picture of where our community mental health will be in 3 to 5 years' time. And I was hoping that this is something that we can bring to a board strategy discussion, because I think it's really important, because all too often you hear us talk about how we need to do more in the community to prevent people pitching up in hospital. So if it's okay, that work that I feel strongly and colleagues agree that we need to do. So we'll bring it to, originally we thought February, but I'm not sure if we can manage February because of the agenda. Yeah, it could be April.
Suzanne, please.
Thanks. I found this a really interesting report, and I was interested in the cover sheet that you refer to, the next iteration of the strategy. So I wanted to ask you a question which might seem a bit unfair, but as a doctor, it's one you've heard before, which is, what might you do differently? If you're going to start this now, what might you do differently next time around?
I suppose that's also what has my reflection been as being the SRO for the last 3 years. I think I would do, and we are doing a lot more co-design and co-production, because what I thought people would need or would require from out of hospital care, um, it's been very varied. So I remember a previous NED, Steve James, also always used to ask me, how would you know you've made a difference? And in one of the videos we've done, one thing someone wanted to do as part of their recovery was being able to get to their dental appointment by themselves and also to spend Christmas with their family. They didn't talk about pain reduction. They didn't talk about anything relating to symptoms, although part of what we do would include that. But what was important to them was being able to get to a dental appointment by themselves and spend Christmas with their family. And they were able to do that. So there are things like that. Just, I suppose for me, and what I would want to impress on clinicians and my colleagues is about compassion, and compassion in a way that you see a person in front of you, not a patient, so to say, and not a number. So that's what I would want to do differently.
We're in that exciting stage at the moment where we're reflecting on the strategy that we've had for the last 3 years and looking at all the successes, as well as starting to think how we evolve it. It's been great to have conversations with many of you about those sorts of issues. One of the areas that we're looking to potentially expand in the new strategy is around what do we really mean by great care, and that point about compassion is a really important part of that. But we want to come together and start to articulate, you know, the list really of things that we can self-assess ourselves against in each service about what great care really means. So that might include it being NICE compliant. It might be about how we engage service users or use digital, or make sure that people are waiting well and are given the sort of information they need to be able to manage while they're waiting for a particular intervention. Might be about trauma-informed care. I mean, there's a whole host of things it could be. But I think a real development for us as an organisation could be for us to be absolutely crystal clear about what great care means. And so much of that comes through the work that Abby's done over the last few years, and for us to try and make sure that every one of our services is thinking about that and the areas where they might want to develop their services. So there'll be a lot of discussion about the new strategy over the next few months, but I just wanted to give you that taste.
Thanks, Rachel. Anything else on that? If not, Abby, thanks very much indeed. Very grateful. Lorraine, please.
Thanks, Chair. Similarly to Abby, I'll assume that you've kind of read the papers and just pick out a couple of key highlights for zero delays. So obviously, it was always quite an ambitious programme, zero delays. I think managing waiting times in the NHS is always tricky. We had no idea back in 2019 of what we were going to face in terms of the huge increases in demand. And I think that's inevitably limited some of the celebration that we might have wanted to do around the success. But absolutely confident that without the programme, we would have seen considerably longer waits for services. And so whilst it may not have eliminated delays or waits, it certainly made huge strides in improving that. And we've done that in a number of ways. So we've introduced standardised digital approaches to waiting lists across all but one team in the organisation now. That's allowed much greater visibility of waits to both teams and the broader kind of organisation. We have some new metrics. All teams have a target wait time. And then we have to think about how we use that information, and that's where the improvement collaborative has really helped teams to think about change ideas and improvement initiatives. And we've seen a really broad range of things that have made a difference. So the solution is never the same. The solution for some teams, so I think there's an example in there about the Greenwich Continent Service, where the solution was very much about reducing DNAs to enable better efficiency and use of the appointments. In other services, it's been about pathway redesigns. In some services, it's about additional resources. So there's been a really broad range of approaches to that. And we are now seeing some sustainable change on the back of those projects. So again, in kind of thinking of where to take the programme forward, we've given teams a kind of toolbox, but we need to help them use it. And I think some of the things that we've introduced, the technology in itself doesn't improve waiting times. It then needs to be used in a relatively sophisticated way in order to really manage those waits. And we know that not all of our teams are able to don't have the skills or the expertise around demand and capacity planning, for example, to use that in a routine day-to-day way. So we're really having a focus on addressing demand and capacity. That's also linked to productivity, and it links to our financial picture, the fact that we know that for most services going into the next few years, we're not likely to see increases in resource. So we need teams to be thinking differently about the resources that they've already got and how to improve productivity. And also the feedback from patients and teams around waiting well initiatives and what we can do to support self-management, and the fact that we need to be working with teams so that they realise that they're not the only people that can solve some of these problems, and they need to be working with the broader system around the patient to explore self-management and kind of other community options. So still an awful lot of work to do, but exciting times, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. And questions, colleagues? Sophie, please.
Yeah, no, I was really, really interested to see this because when I came into the trust, I think this was one of my main challenges, seeing those words zero delays. As a layperson, you think, well, that means zero wait lists, zero delays. So it was really, really interesting to see where we were, where we are, and how we got here from an internal perspective. And I was just thinking going forward, how the term zero delays does sit with patients, because I think waiting well is a really interesting concept, and one that I know I've seen through CAMS visits and others that people are really, really engaged with. But how do we test that? How do we test that with patients and with our partners, that it's understood? Because otherwise people will continue to see zero delays as zero delays, whereas I think waiting well is actually what we're talking about. And zero delays is a wonderful ambition, but something that's beyond our control.
Here before, haven't we? And it's certainly something that's needed a lot of explanation. We took it to a number of places. We had some interesting discussions at the AMM meetings and in the delivery group for zero delays. Certainly from a staff perspective, people were hugely reluctant to change the term. It was something that we proposed last year. I think that's just because it's something that's become kind of known and understood by teams. It does sometimes need additional explanation for public patients. But I think with that explanation, people kind of do get it. It's a real tricky one in terms of ambition, isn't it? Because I often think of it when Joe Rafferty introduced zero suicide, and how much controversy there was about whether or not that was just a step too far, too ambitious, too big a kind of leap. But we need to be ambitious, and if you don't have ambitious targets, you don't have ambitious actions to kind of get you there. So I think, I've lived on, the kind of detail of it for 3 years. I feel comfortable, but I recognise that it's still a really tricky one for other people.
And just to add, I agree completely with Lorraine. And in fact, quite apart from this paper, when one reflects on the journey we've been on, fantastic. I remember in the earlier years, if you asked staff what they were doing, they got nervous. They were pointing fingers about weights. But, I think where we're coming to now is that this will help us to tackle demand and capacity. So it's no longer a case of saying, oh, people are waiting, therefore we need more staff. But it's more about we don't want people to wait, and how do we make sure we achieve that? The sort of things Lauren has talked about. We're still thinking whether there's a new term we can use, but I definitely don't want to lose this. And in fact, part of the conversation now is about how do we, as an organization, really major on demand and capacity? Because whether we like it or not, that's the only thing that's going to help the NHS going forward. So it's going to draw in productivity, etc. So this for me is a really, really important strategy. But I also don't want what we call it to get in the way, because from your point of view, it's about how onlookers, outsiders see it. But internally, I need us to be absolutely clear about the work we're doing and what we're achieving. So, well, we've got a few more rounds of this, but I am with Lorraine on this in terms of, what we're calling it right now.
Thanks. So it's a really good time for this discussion, isn't it? Because we, over the next few months, will be kind of socialising some of these issues and thinking about, as we look at the strategy for the next 3 years, I think we all recognise we want it to be evolution, not revolution. But I think there is an opportunity for us to think again about how we position or approach these areas, as well as to celebrate lots of good things that have happened, as well as the challenges that we still need to address. I do think whatever we do, we need to move the focus to us becoming really skilled at demand and capacity modelling, and that this is something that we are proud of in Oxleas, that we are innovative, we think differently. People look to us for what we do in this space, because those problems are not going away. There will be continuing burgeoning demand. There'll be continuing limitations on our capacity, both financially, but also in terms of being able to get the right people into the organisation. So we've got to face up to the fact that we can't meet that gap without some really creative and innovative thinking. So I want to think about it from the perspective of both a staff member and a member of the public who receives our services. Faced with that challenge, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to approach it? How are we going to help ourselves to kind of think really creatively about how we approach this going forward? So, hopefully the focus in the strategy will be on something that staff really feel helps support them to address those challenges, but also helps them to realise the real successes that there have been within that Zero Delays programme, as well as the challenges which continue.
Thanks, Rachel. Suzanne, please. Or Stephen, then.
Keep mine short. I feel totally the same as Sophie, that I think it does work tremendously well internally, and as you say, we don't want to lose that ethos. But externally, I'd be interested in some feedback, because I suspect it wouldn't be good. So I think it's something about keeping our promises, but obviously that is a terrible phrase. But I mean, in essence, that's what we need to be talking about in whatever the phrase ends up at. And secondly, glad, Lorraine, you touched on the 50% DNAs. I've never seen it so high, although I totally understand with that programme, there's good reasons for it. So it'd be great to, in another 3-4 months, to 6 months maybe, to just see how that's going, because obviously that's huge. You won't have seen anything like that before, 50%? No.
Suzanne, please.
So I just wanted to ask you about the slide which is headed key considerations, because I thought it was really interesting in this slide that it set out how incredibly complicated these pathways are for patients who need several interventions. So the nub of the question really is about what we mean by meaningful intervention. I mean, who decides that it's meaningful? Is that our decision that it's meaningful, or is it the patient's view that it's meaningful? And if somebody needs several interventions, how do we make sure that the one that's most meaningful to them and is going to make the most difference to them is the one that they get first? I realise that what this slide sets up is an issue of enormous complexity, but I'd be grateful if you could help me understand that one to start with.
So there's been lots of debate around meaningful intervention internally, externally with NHS England. It's a really tricky kind of term. However, the intention behind it is to ensure that from a patient's perspective, they have received something that has supported the first meaningful step in their journey to treatment, recovery, whatever that service is. And I think it recognises, and when we were debating with some colleagues from NHS England, it kind of recognises that we're talking about such a diverse and broad range of services, that it's very difficult to define it for everybody. So it is sort of left a little bit to individual teams and services to define. But we have put some definition behind it at a kind of team level. So, for example, in mental health, previously the clock would have stopped on the first kind of contact. And that first contact was invariably a telephone call that asked a series of questions but didn't actually provide anything in return for the information. The clock now doesn't stop until there has been an appointment that gives something to the patient, and there's 5 different things that might be. So a social prescribing intervention, a co-produced care plan, a face-to-face appointment including family members. There's a series of things that would kind of stop that clock, and that's, for that particular service line, that's the definition of meaningful, where previously that phone call wasn't, from a patient perspective, a meaningful kind of step forward. It was a repetition of information sharing that they probably felt they'd done several times already.
So, in relation to being seen by several disciplines as part of a single pathway, do we mean a meaningful intervention from each of the several disciplines, or the clock stops once you've had one meaningful intervention from one discipline? And I'm just trying to get a sense of what it's like to be a patient facing quite protracted waits, maybe having felt that you've got in the door, but then finding you don't really get any further. So perhaps you could just unpick that a bit.
Yeah, so as you might expect, this isn't altogether straightforward either. So if it's a series of professionals within the same pathway, the meaningful intervention is the beginning of that pathway. So the first point of contact, and not each individual clinician or profession within that pathway. But if, for example, you were somebody who was on a waiting list for mental health services, but you were also on an MSK waiting list or something in a a completely different kind of part of the service, then each of those referrals would require a meaningful intervention to stop the clock. Because clearly in your mental health pathway, we're not going to be doing anything to meaningfully resolve your MSK kind of issues. But if it's that you are in a mental health pathway and it's considered that you need psychological therapy, but you also need an outpatient appointment to do medication, then actually the first of those appointments would stop the clock.
Abby, please.
Thanks, Jay. I suppose the only thing I wanted to add, being a clinician working in Bexley Memory Service, they love it. It's made the waiting times much more visible to every team member. So in terms of finding solutions to deal with the demand, they've now started doing that. And previously you'd sort of have to knock people's heads together to get that done, because it's so visible and you don't want people to wait. They then find different ways of, okay, let's tweak here, tweak there. But memory service across the trust have found it very, very helpful.
I mean, this is obviously enormously challenging. It's a topic in itself, let alone add COVID industrial action to it. This has been really difficult. And thank you very much, Lorraine, for the work you've done to get us here, which is really the foothills of this, isn't it? It's providing the tools to understand in many respects. And echoing, I think, Iffy's point, there isn't going to be any more money, no matter who's in government soon. We're going to have to get on with what we've got. So I think you set us up for this. I do echo Sophie and Stephen's points. I mean, just ask a member of the public what zero delays means, and I'd pin Matthew down and say, "What do you mean by that?" And he would say, "Well,
not a long time
I
ago,
know, and he would answer, "Oh, it means you're not going to wait any longer than we told you're going to wait." So I get it internally, but we're externally faced organisation, and it's the patients, obviously. So again, I want to repeat my thanks. This looks really challenging, and clearly, as you develop the new strategy, you'll be looking at hard objectives with figures attached to them to say, by this time, we will have done this. you know, so that we can actually have I would have thought, it's a matter of the next regime, to have annual targets that sit inside a 3-year plan, so we can say, right, that's where we reckon we're going to be if we do this. Because in common with everybody, we have some extraordinary long waiting list. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. And that goes for anyone here waiting for an operation would say the same thing. Hence, that's why so many people are taking alternative routes at the moment. But again, thanks ever so much, Lorraine. A real tough one that you picked up, and look forward to the developments in this arena. Neil, please.
Thanks, Chair. So taking the paper as read, this is a strategy update on a building block, not on a big priority. So the building blocks are there to facilitate the big priorities and the other work that we want to do. They're not essentially ends in themselves. So we are an infrastructure to support all the co-production in the trust. So just as a high level description of the report, what I would appreciate people noting is that we are taking a particular view on this in Oxleas, that we're not just chasing quantity, high numbers, we're actually asking ourselves questions about quality. What do we mean by quality of involvement? It means having different levels that people can come in that suit their needs and suit our needs. But quality also means asking some difficult questions about how well people are prepared, how well teams are prepared, but also about representation. How is the lived experience representing the different communities we have? So that's by demographic protected characteristics, but also how old is the experience of our services, because that's been a problem in this field, where people have been on registers for a long time and they're talking about services which have radically changed or even don't exist. So we're doing that. I think when we ask questions about quality, I think that casts doubt on other organizations' claims about quantity, a bit like the difference between having real friends and Facebook friends, in my view. What we have found is that we have a few gaps when we ask those questions: children and young people, physical health. But also when we ask about time limits, we've generated some complaints within Involve from Involve members who would like to stay longer, but actually we think it'd be better for them to move on to other activities. And also that their experience is, again, that problem of talking about services which have changed or no longer exist. So I think we're grasping the nettle with that. But the report is there and the numbers are there otherwise.
Thanks, Neil. Any questions for Suzanne, please?
Thanks. I really valued getting this report and would endorse what you're saying about the need to really focus on the quality of the involvement work that we do, because I think that it is all too rare to really support service users well to be involved. Having said that, I did have a question about the maximum stay on the register for 2 years, because it's not that long, and I take the point that this is viewed as a journey and not a destination, but then that raises the question for me of people who have been involved with us for 2 years and have had that support and have built an inclusive group. What is there for them to then move on to afterwards? Because I could guess that it might feel quite hard to have been involved in a very focused way with the trust for 2 years, and then suddenly you get to the end of your term. I mean, I've been thinking about that because I know that I'm going to be re-elected as a NED at some point. You know, it's part of your belonging to the organisation.
They're great points. And of course, there's reasonable adjustments for people who need longer. So perhaps people with learning disabilities or all of this. And we've set that provisional date. But there is a lot of activity that the PPI, the People Participation Leads, do to look for the what next. And in a way, it's a pity Joe Mant isn't here, because we have our associate members, we have our sort of membership. And actually, there's a community that actually we could supercharge by sort of bringing people into this. They could lead work with that. So we have been actively thinking about what next with people. And I think we've got a number of structures that we could use a bit better to build that community, you know. And plus they can go on to other roles. They could go on to become a lived experience practitioner if they wanted.
Yeah, first of all, I think our volunteer structure and program is as good as you could find anywhere. I mean, particularly the induction and the training that Neil does in conjunction with Japleen. But we'll give you all the praise because Japleen's not here.
She's not here.
Discussed earlier. So we can be very proud of that. I think a little bit more work has been touched on the paper on diversity, particularly in the volunteers. But again, I know work's going forward on that. I also can't help thinking that when we're talking about zero delays, running that through, as we saw on that mission statement earlier, running that through some of the co-production groups would be really interesting. What does it mean to them, and what alternatives do they suggest? But lots of great work there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in what you said, Suzanne, about the length of time people stay on the register. So I guess the reason why there might be a timescale on it is because you want to keep involvement fresh and dynamic. And Neil and myself and probably others on the board who've been in mental health services a long time, for example, can see how if you don't do that, you start to have kind of not ended, but a kind of not helpful kind of structure setting up. But I think it's a good point that a lot of people who are involved through their lived experience, for example, in a service like Oxleas, will have quite a long-term relationship, and particularly kind of people with long-term conditions whether it's mental or physical health, and those things are kind of based around relationships. So I think yeah, some kind of flexibility would be helpful. Otherwise you kind of get some, you know, I've seen this in outside of health and social care, that a real focus on recovery, and that as a positive thing, people moving on, and that isn't always experienced as a positive thing by the people who are subject to that recovery. So I do think a nuanced approach, which I'm sure we're taking, is helpful.
And you're absolutely right. And we will keep reviewing the 2 years. I mean, we're noticing it with the committee in common, the shadow committee in common, for the level of induction people need to just understand what on earth we're doing here. I mean, I think my own induction was about 2 years, you know, to work it out. It's still going. Yes, I still don't know what I'm doing. But worth saying that that 2 years, a preparation period, but then there will be a range of other offers that people can stay involved. So that 100 people is in a way is the apprenticeship to be involved in other ways. So in our quality, our QI work, there is some ideas about people staying longer because they've got those skills. They don't need to stay on that register. So I think we shouldn't be too focused just on the 100 people on the register. It's an apprenticeship.
Well done, Neil. Thanks ever so much. Thank you. Well, we're going to go on to the committee reports now. I'm conscious that Ify and Azra have to be gone by 1. I certainly aim for us to be done by then. But if we were to just change the orders a bit if we were to do business and audit, just to go that way around, if that's okay with colleagues, is that all right? I'll give you a 30 seconds warning there, Joe. And that way, if there is any long delay, then at least you can move on to those. Okay. Is that a long enough slow intro for you, Joe? Okay. All right. Joe, please.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll just highlight a few things. So we continue to be on plan and are aiming to improve on our plan as a result of ICS discussions, which I guess was sort of November. Plenty of ICS discussions since then, and it sounds like there's one imminently as well. Other things to pick out, we talked some way back about the potential for cash transfers between trusts within an ICS. We got some legal advice on that, which I think is very helpful. We haven't, none have been requested. It was interesting. What was clear on that is if, for example, another provider is requesting a cash transfer, they have to produce a justification, which doesn't just go to the ICS, it goes to us, and we have to then form a view based on that. So I think we've shared all that with our ICS colleagues, I think, which is quite helpful. At the last meeting of the committee, We saw a paper about significant cost pressures in the southwest prisons. That's an ongoing topic, which I think we'll be returning to. We'll certainly get an update at Business Committee next week. And I think we'll come to the board in due course, hopefully, I guess, when we know where we are with commissioners, because there was ongoing discussions with commissioners. We had an update on sustainability, which was really interesting. The headline is our emissions have actually gone up, but our activity has gone up as well. So, but there's some really good stuff in there, and some ideas of how to improve really every member of staff thinking about sustainability. And we thought they were very good. We talked about the Bexley PFI risk that in the BAF. And Ian talked about the acute mental health beds program, and we got an update on the metrics we'll be talking about for that program at the last meeting. And again, very helpful, a lot of detail in there, a lot of good work going on. And the final thing I was going to say is just going back to the Service Users and Carers Shadow Committee. Azra and I are meeting with that committee next week to go through the Business Committee Risk Register, and then we have 3 members of that committee coming to the February Business and Infrastructure Committee meeting.
Thank you,
Happy
Jo.
to take questions.
Thank you. Azra, anything to add?
So the only thing to add is the fact that we've still not had any of the national guidance in regards to 24-25. That still hasn't been issued yet, but we have started work both internally within Oxleas and also with the ICS. But I am going to say landing 23-24 is now being the element that we're spending the most time on as an ICS, because we are going to be significantly off plan on the H2 forecast that was previously submitted.
Thank you, Ezra. Any questions at all for Jo or Ezra? If not, okay.
No,
okay. All right. Thanks very much. Yes. Audit then, please. Thank you.
Yes, very much self-explanatory. I think most of the items I've covered. Just a few points to mention. Being fully compliant on emergency preparedness. I mean, that's tremendous. Every thing that you could possibly need to cover, we have covered off. So it's a great achievement and consistent with previous years. Just for information on the OPS accounts, if you don't know what OPS is, it's the Oxleas Prison Services, and it provides pharmaceutical support. So good to see that keeping its head above water. And finally, on the fit and proper persons test, as you see, that's been what will be covered there is all the people who attend basically the board meeting on a regular basis, which is a very efficient way to do it and the right amount of cover.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen at all? If not, thanks very much. We'll go back to the item 11 now, the non-quality, please, Suzanne.
It reminds me of being an old hippie. You can't talk without passing it on. So I didn't want to say much about the Quality Committee report, because I think it's fairly clear that we've been discussing a lot of things which have come up at board. There are only 2 things that I did want to draw attention to, and one was the sentiment analysis project, which was to better understand some of the written feedback that's coming from the FFT questions. We had a very interesting discussion about this at the committee, because there's a degree of enthusiasm for using tools which would enable us to get a better feel for the quality of patient experience from a lot of the data that we get. At the same time, there was also a view that we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just more data gathering, but resulted in some meaningful change. So it was interesting to hear that the Bexley MSK team are already developing a QI project based on some of the initial data. The second thing I wanted to note was that the committee received a very useful briefing on the systems in operation routinely for keeping an eye on controlled drugs, medicine, medication administration and mortality surveillance. I think one of the things which really came out of that was that we can have a lot of paper-based or electronic systems, but ultimately one of the things that we do need to ensure is that we have staff who are prepared to speak up when they see something that they find untoward, and that nothing ultimately is really going to replace that as the necessary backstop. And I think it reinforced the need to ensure that we do have a really effective listening and speaking up culture. We have there are various ways of assuring that, but ultimately it comes down to being open to hearing what it is staff are telling us, which may and them knowing that they can raise issues.
Thanks, Suzanne. I was just thinking about the cover sheet, I suppose, thinking about the alert on there, wanting to alert the board to those matters. There's quite a few there, isn't there? And I was just thinking about us discharging our responsibility as a board when they're being alerted to us, without going through all of them necessarily. I was just trying to think of the way we ought to be doing this. Is there anything in there that you think you want to raise with us now? And or should we then say that we want an update on that at the next board meeting to see what's happened as a result of those alerts? Because it sits there on the papers, doesn't it?
I think you raise a really interesting point, Andy, about the way in which we're using this template, because I did have a discussion with the team about where we want to put stuff in terms of alert or assure. I think on balance, I felt that some of the stuff in the alert section is really about assurance, in the sense that what we are assuring the board is that we are aware that these things are there and they're not brilliant. And I think that maybe the alert section really needs to be limited to stuff that is of a particular degree of seriousness. But I'm interested in the board's view on that, because since we adopted this template, we haven't really had much further discussion about what people are assigning to each of the areas.
We are coming up for a time to actually look at the board effectiveness. So perhaps we could do some survey or something and try and get some consensus on how the templates are working. And perhaps at the board away day in February, perhaps we could have a short conversation on that.
Yeah, it's something I think I'd like to have a cockshy that we talk about, something you present to us, because I suppose I'm thinking about this, thinking you're alerting the board to it. So what's the board done with it? That's sort of basically. Is it something then we'd looked for an answer from the exec to say, this has been raised, here's the answer? That's one way of doing it. And or was this to say, we want to alert the board to it and we want a discussion about it, which still means the exec's got to be prepared to have that discussion. And it's not just about CQC overseeing us, it's about us doing our job. And someone will say, you were told about this, you've been alerted to this, what you've done. Because we haven't actually discussed those issues that we've been alerted to. So I think something of a draft way of dealing with this from February would be helpful, rather than just talk around the houses, we have something to look at. But I'm very conscious of the fact that when things are raised with the board, we need to be able to say, what do we do with it? Jo, please.
I think that's probably right. I think, and I'm looking at the business committee now, and probably a couple of those should have been advise rather than alert. But you would hope, I think there needs to be a so what. So it may be something that we've discussed elsewhere, for example. So, we've had a discussion in IFE's report, for example, or the committee is now going to do further work on that and then bring something back or something. But I think, because I struggle with the same thing, with Alex, we were sort of talking about what goes in alert, what goes in advise. And alert, I think, has to be that, and therefore, ... We're going to do we're either going to have a separate agenda item, we pick it up elsewhere, or there's follow-on work that will then come. I think that will probably narrow down then what we put in alert, and lots more will go in advise, but then that might be more meaningful. It would be interesting to look at any analysis that says, but part of me thinks we got to have something in alert, because we can't have a naked box. But I think, it's the so what for alert.
Yeah, so I was just looking at all the items in alert, and this kind of feels like areas where we haven't quite achieved what we set out to achieve. alerting the board is one thing, but I'm also confident that work continues to try and achieve them, but it's about how we close that loop, you know. And I think your point, Joe, about some of this being advised, we advise the board we haven't achieved this, but XYZ are looking at it to try and bring some resolution and need to be monitored, you know. Yeah.
Anybody else on that? So I just reiterate that point. You've alerted us, you know, so as a board, we've been alerted. We ought to be saying, what have we done about that? So I'm not just picking on the quality. I could pick some, but there were so many in there. I thought this is really interesting. But no, thanks very much for that. Any other questions on quality? If not, we'll go on to mortality, please.
Thank you. I was just reflecting on when I wrote the paper that went to quality, I had them in different sections completely. So I think this is going to be a bit further spread than just looking at the committees. The mortality surveillance report for Q2 has been seen by the executive, the mortality surveillance committee and the quality committee and reviewed by them. And we were satisfied that all of the deaths have been reviewed. A couple of areas I just wanted to highlight was, although we've given some examples of some of the leader reports into deaths of people with learning disabilities, we are still experiencing longer delays in terms of the turnaround time since they have been commissioned externally. We are receiving the reports, we're acting on the information, but it's taking longer to get to us. So we're hoping that that will improve over time, but it's not really within our gift at the moment. The other thing that we reflected on was we present the quality of care and the structured judgment reviews, but at the time of writing the reports, these are not always available. Some of the investigations are still underway. So we're going to strengthen that and do some tables that go back in time so that we've got a better picture of that to put into future reports. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Joe, anything to add?
The only thing I'd highlight is this issue that Norfolk and Suffolk had on terms of mortality review, and we took that report and sort of benchmarked ourselves against it, and I think that was generally positive, some improvement to do. And then Jane, you actually had a visit from them, didn't you? I mean, the data is, I think if you're a mental health and community trust, particularly I think for the community aspect, you know, you're trying to compare deaths on the spine to deaths in, and it's really difficult. And you know, I would think it would be unfair for this board to think we get a perfect match all the time. I think we are confident that any deaths that are known about within the trust, we're absolutely on. But, you know, you'd employ a team of people trying to do that reconciliation on an ongoing basis. The thing that I find amazing is how late some deaths are notified on the spine. So we know about deaths often before we get the spine for quite some time, actually, isn't it? But then that may also fit in with things like the fact that getting cause of death remains still an issue. The other thing to mention is medical examiners. We've had the medical examiner from LGT who will sort of cover our area, talk at the board. I don't think we were particularly convinced that he understood the tsunami of deaths, basically, that were coming his way. So we'll keep our eye on that. And I think the other thing is with PSERV as well, you know, in due course, we need to work out how that impacts mortality committee. You've got to think that there will be an impact there, positive, hopefully. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jane. Any questions at all? Mortality? If not, thanks very much for that. Nina, people, please.
Thank you. There are two parts to our report. The first is the usual. The second is, I believe we're asking boards to delegate to us the delegated authority to approve EDS. Is that right, Rachel? Yes. So I hope us and Quality Committee. Okay. So I hope that that will be granted. I believe that's something that we've done previously as well. In terms of our usual standing report, and I think it was a really useful discussion around what fits into the alert box. You can see that we have two main things. I won't go over the industrial action point, because we have discussed that at length already. The committee is nervous, and that's why it sits under alert, about the continuing vacancies that we have in fire safety roles, a manager role and an advisor role. And it feels as if we have been trying to recruit to these roles for a very long time. And the nervousness comes from triangulating a couple of quite serious fires that we've had, Millbrook and Lesney, notwithstanding that Millbrook was almost a kind of best in class response for a number of reasons. But we are continuing to look at, and we have explored and we've probed, I think quite rigorously, the steps that we are trying to take to fill these roles. But there is a shortage of fire safety professionals in the UK, and we are all fishing in the same pond. And we are comfortable that Rachel T and team have been as creative as it's possible to be to recruit, but we are continuing to look at other ways we can mitigate the risk. And I think, building on the discussion we've had, I would quite like to bring, even if it's a one-pager, to the board, just to make you aware of some of the discussions we've been having over the last few months, so that you are on the same page. In terms of assurance, I would pull out that we had a very good staff survey completion rates. I believe our highest ever at 56%. We are also continuing to see positive assurance in terms of health and safety audits, which is actually a really important signal in the wake of having introduced a couple of years ago a new iAuditor system and gradually reducing the amount of support that managers are given to be able to do the annual audits. Vacancy levels, you can see, are compare favourably with peer trusts and are some of the lowest that I remember them being over the last couple of years. On the advisory side, I want to pull out two things. We would ordinarily have had the Freedom to Speak Up half-year update by the Guardian service, but that's been postponed to our meeting next Tuesday because of illness of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. So you have a summary update, which we haven't actually discussed as a committee. We will be discussing that on Tuesday, but we will come back to you as we ordinarily would at the July board with our annual report, and that will go to the May. The full report of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian will go to the May People Committee. We also had a really interesting discussion that with Abby around medical workforce, and it was the beginning of a discussion. And it was very helpful and valuable in terms of helping us understand what the previous strategy was trying to address, and understanding the journey that we've been on over the last few years and what that means in terms of, there's a few bullet points that highlight some of the pressures that will be familiar to all of us around an aging medical workforce, the need to continue to enhance the use of technology. So we had an interesting discussion around where we're at and the direction of travel, but this will be an ongoing discussion with People Committee over the coming months to go into further detail on the areas that the future strategy needs to cover and what that needs to look like. And we also noted that over the last few months, Oxleas has been invited to give presentations to both the CQC and the GMC, which is quite an unusual position and a wonderful position to be in. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Nina. On the fire post, obviously all this stuff is no doubt being looked at. Do the fire services inspect us at all? Do London Fire and Kent Fire inspect our premises?
I don't believe that they do, but we have a framework which requires us to complete, and I can't remember the frequency of it, fire drills and our own fire safety assessments. I don't believe that the fire service is involved in those. And we have had a form of assurance at the committee that we are as up to date as is possible on the drills and the assessments that are required within that framework. But I think the danger is if you don't have a permanent fire safety advisor and a manager in role, you don't know what you don't know. So that's what we're trying to get under the skin of a little bit more.
Joe, please.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, and it came up in the Estates Update of Business and Infrastructure Committee. There are, I think there have been for some time, ongoing issues in terms of fire safety compliance on the Prue site, which I think are sort of indicative of continuing struggles Kings have with their PFI partner. There are some particular fire issues where I think they're on their third report now in terms of the site, but they keep not including Green Parks House, which was built earlier, but and is of different construction, but by the same contractor. So we are pushing Kings to include Green Parks House. We know there are issues there, and we continue to engage with them. I think we are confident that from an evacuation people point of view, we are in a safe place, and there's been quite a lot of focus on that. Whether we are, I think we are less confident that if there was a serious fire, how the building would fare, which obviously would give its own issues. Clearly, if we were fully recruited on the fire side, then that would really help in terms of negotiations going forward. So we, after Business and Infrastructure Committee, we received sort of further assurance from Rachel that, you know, we've got good mitigations in place, but there's just this theme developing there. Clearly, it's widespread in terms of the skills.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's been thought about. You wonder if in the interim, do we bring in a fire consultancy or something that, you know? Thanks ever so much. Joe, please.
Sorry, can I just commend the point number 4 in the advice, which is the Improving the Diversity of Mental Health Act hospital managers. That's really good, you know, and certainly as part of our equality work. And I would imagine that wasn't the easiest thing to do. So well done to everyone.
Thank you very much. Well done. Anything else on people? If not, Nina, thanks very much indeed. Council of Governors report is there in the papers. Is there any questions for me or Sue on that at all? As I said at the beginning, we've got a very good crop, haven't we, Sue, of new governors? They look very lively, very interested. So really pleased to see that. Just on the review, is there anything else or anyone else before we pack up? Alison, I was just conscious of not sort of giving sufficient attention to IT, and thanks for you and your department, because anyone who's ever had to ring them up with some problem or other, I found them invariably really, really helpful. So I'd like you to pass on my thanks to your team for all the errors that I make from time to time and their patience and understanding. But I mean, I'm not putting you on the spot, Alison, but anything from your department at the moment you'd like to update us on?
Yeah, user issue, as we were discussing. So, I mean, I think the team have been very involved in a lot of the items that we've discussed today. So with the rollout of zero delays, the team have developed the functionality in Rio and have been rolling out the waiting list functionality across the trust in conjunction with Lorraine and many others in terms of developing the metrics. We've been making big inroads in terms of our dashboards. I was just talking to Jim earlier about we've been developing not only more metrics on our dashboards, but thinking about how we cut and slice that data in different ways. We've just developed a CQC dashboard, which will hopefully help us with inspections, because all of the information that the quality team sometimes gather, a lot of it, not everything, but a lot of it will be available through that route, and we'll be able to have that information at our fingertips when we get CQC inspections. In terms of cybersecurity and thinking about the IT team, there's a huge amount of work underway in terms of rolling out all of the equipment, particularly mobile phones, and doing some work behind the scenes in terms of the switch infrastructure, and a huge amount of work over the summer in Southwest. So we've, as you might recall, we had some delays in equipment, and we rolled out over the summer the new IT infrastructure for the Southwest, which went in very smoothly over a number of weekends. And we've received some really positive feedback about that rollout. So I think that's probably it in summary. We're just about to roll out a digital audit tool, which again, I was saying to Jim, will take away the last bits of proper bits of paper that we're using in the organisation with that digital tool. So we'll look forward to seeing how that gets rolled out in practice.
Thanks very much. I always find whenever I ask what's going on, there's so much going on. And I just wonder whether or not we ought to hear a bit more in somebody else's report or a separate report. Because there's so much and it's absolutely vital to what we do. And I'm always, as I say, surprised and impressed by what's actually happening. What do you think?
We always do an annual update to business and infrastructure. That was last September.
Yeah, right. Thanks very much. Anything else on the meeting itself, colleagues? I mean, personally, I think it was some terrific discussion there. Thanks very much for your hard work and your contributions. And if there's nothing else from anyone else, forward agenda, we've got it there on the papers. If there's nothing else from anyone else, we'll declare the meeting closed. Thanks very much indeed, Roy. Thank you.